Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Wow, it's great to see everybody here, taking time. Mic. Can you hear me? Yep. Yeah, it's great to see. Yep. It's great to see everybody here on a Sunday, taking time to come to a investment talk. Hopefully, I'll be able to share with you some advice on retirement planning that would be useful for you. Now, after hearing the Flying Dutchman and Sam, I wish I would have gone ahead of them because I don't have a fancy video to show you. And on the other hand, I also don't have stock tips for you. But hopefully, some of this advice will still be useful for you. So, that brings me to the topic of the day, SRS. What's it all about? In Singapore, we love our acronyms. We have all sorts of acronyms, CPF, IRS, HDB, and of course, COE, which is a very popular topic now. But I guess with a show of hands, how many of you have actually heard of SRS? Wow! Seems like, as Sam said, wow, I learned something new today. All the sales members, I guess, invest in SRS. Well, for those who have invested in SRS, great. Do bear with me. Hopefully, I can still share some insight into SRS. But at the same time, on the second part of the presentation, I'll be talking about how to invest in SRS and what are the things that you can look at. So hopefully, that will be useful to you. So for those of you who don't know what SRS means, SRS actually stands for Supplementary Retirement Scheme. Okay, I would actually like to call it a small retirement secret because even though SRS has been introduced for many years, since 2001, okay, the fact is that still a lot of people have not actually invested in SRS. Just looking at some of the stats that's provided by MOF, only about 80,000 Singaporeans have sort of invested into SRS. Okay, so it's really a very small number, and hopefully, with today's presentation, you can understand what it's all about and consider it as a form of investment planning or retirement planning. Okay, for those of you who, as I say, you're not familiar with SRS, SRS is actually part of the government's drive to encourage individuals to save more for retirement. Okay, it's kind of like a sister scheme to CPF, but unlike CPF, it is totally voluntary. That means you can decide when, how much to invest in SRS. Okay, and but there is a cap subjected to the scheme. Okay, one of the key benefits of SRS is that it actually offers deferred tax benefit. Okay, we'll talk a little bit more about that, but basically what it means is that after you have whatever investment returns you have generated in the SRS, and when you take it out after 62 years old, which is the retirement age, you actually get taxed at 50%. Rather than what you're being taxed. And in most cases, when you are at retirement age, you tend to be in the lower tax bracket. So you do benefit from that purpose as well. Okay? And the contributions, as I mentioned, it can be used to purchase various investment products. Now, what are the benefits and drawbacks of SRS? First thing that I think is important is that it really encourages a disciplined savings because the money you put into the SRS is sort of, there will be a penalty if you withdraw it early. And I guess to most of us, the temptation is always there. For the ladies, there are things like Prada, Gucci, LV. And for the guys, I guess things like Mercedes, BMW, and Rolexes, there's always temptation there. Okay, so this scheme actually helps you to put yourself into a discipline to invest to plan for your future retirement. Okay? Second thing, which I've already mentioned early on, is that you can defer the tax. So we'll go through some examples later, but really it's something that we should all consider, because you don't really have many opportunities where the government actually give you an opportunity to pay less taxes. Okay? Next, the income that you generate, or the investment gain you generate from the SRS, is tax-free until you take it out during your retirement. Okay? What it means is that if you have taken the cash and invest into anything, normally whatever returns or gains that you generate will be taxed according to your tax bracket for the year. Okay? So this actually helps to defer the gains. I mean the tax. Next is tax will only be payable when you withdraw your SRS. And I mentioned earlier on, after 62 years old, when you withdraw when you withdraw your SRS, chances are that you are either in a lower income bracket or you are getting nominal income. Okay, so you end up paying little or no tax for this amount. So who is eligible for SRS? Basically, all Singaporeans, Singapore PRs and foreigners of at least 18 years old is eligible. Okay, of course, you must be an undischarged bankrupt, okay, or is not mentally disordered and is capable of managing your money. Okay, but who are the most suitable people? Well, the truth is that any working individual, okay, who are paying income tax, it doesn't matter whether you're self-employed or you're working for someone, as long as you're paying income tax, you could benefit from this. And because it's a deferred tax payment scheme, chances are that people who are in the middle tax bracket, okay, of earning about $5,000 or more, would most likely will benefit the most from this scheme. Okay? So you do not need to draw on your SR, but what is more critical is because there are penalties associated with early withdrawal. So you have to be sure that you do not need to use this money, okay, before the retirement age. Otherwise, there will be a penalty imposed. So how does it work? Basically, anybody, as I mentioned, from the age of 18 onwards, you can make contribution to the SRS. Okay, the cap is $12,750 a year. That's the maximum you can put in. Okay, and for foreigners, it's $29,750. Okay, but it doesn't mean that you have to put $12,750. Okay, you can put a lesser amount, and you can put it any time within the year, but for the year, it's capped at $12,750. As I mentioned earlier on, you can withdraw from SRS, okay, but you will be subjected to full tax for the amount that is withdrawn, and on top of that, you will also be penalized with a 5% penalty. Okay, but there are exception cases. Okay, these are in situations where death occurs or there's serious medical grounds, then you can withdraw without incurring the 5% penalty. But you'll still be subjected to a 50% tax. Okay, so if you are able to not draw on this money and only withdraw it after 62 years old, okay, so only 50% of the amount withdrawn at that point in time will be subjected to tax. And you will be taxed based on the prevailing tax rate at that point in time. So again, when you retire, chances are that you will be in a lower tax bracket, okay, earning either nominal income, so you may end up actually paying little or no tax at all. Okay? The other key feature of the scheme is that you can actually take out the money over a 10 years period after the retirement age. Okay, so by doing so, you actually pay lesser tax. Okay, for example, if you take out the lump sum, because the way that our tax scheme works is based on the tiered basis. So if you take out a lump sum, basically you get put into the higher tier. But if you spread it out over 10 years, it means that the income can actually be taxed at a lower bracket, okay, over that period. The thing is that you can only withdraw SRS in cash. So you put in cash, you can put into any investment and things and so forth, okay, but when you want to take it out, you need to liquidate those investments and take it back in cash. So this is an example of how the penalty works. So let's look at the one on my left, okay, which is after 62 years old. Let's say, for example, you withdraw $5,000. Okay, so in this case, it's very straightforward. Only 50% of that $5,000 will be subjected to tax based on your prevailing tax bracket, as I mentioned earlier on. But if you withdraw before 62, what it means is that the full amount of that $5,000 will be taxed, okay, and you will be taxed at the prevailing tax rate, okay, which is usually much higher. Okay, at the same time, you need to pay a 5% penalty. Okay, and this 5% is calculated based on the amount that's withdrawn. So in this case, it's $250. So the amount that you actually withdraw out is $4,750. So bear in mind, there is quite a hefty penalty for early withdrawal. So let's look at what is the tax relief that you can enjoy. So let's first look at the first example, Alex. Okay, he's 32 years old, has one child, and earns approximately $65,000 a year. So basically, without SRS, okay, you can see that his assessable income here is $65,000. After deducting the usual relief, such as your personal relief and your child relief, okay, and also the CPF contribution, the total tax relief is about $17,000. So the income that is subjected to tax is about $48,000. And based on the tax bracket for this, the tax payable is about $1,110. Okay, but if he has put aside $12,750 into his SRS contribution, basically his total tax relief will now increase to $29,750. Okay, that means that he's actually lowered his chargeable income by about $35,000, to $35,250. So the tax that he actually pays is only $383. Okay, this is a tax saving of $727 a year. And assuming if everything is constant, this will actually accumulate to about $21,000 over a 30-year period. Okay, now $727 may seem very little, but in actual fact, just think about this. It's actually, to a certain extent, free money. Okay, the fact is that if you are prepared to put this money aside, okay, into a cash account, for example, into your normal cash investment, okay, what you just need to do is just put it into this scheme, and you enjoy $727, free for that year. Okay, and if you just look at $727 over the sum that you have to set aside, and which is $12,750, this works out actually to be about 6.7%, which is not too bad, right? Now let's look at another example, James. Again, James has one child, and he earns about $110,000 a year. So putting him through the same calculation, basically what it means is that for him, he would have normally paid a tax of about $4,845. Okay? But if he had set aside $12,750 into the SRS, his tax payable for the year actually drops to $3,379. Okay, this is a savings of almost $1,500 for the year. And again, if you look at that, you just set aside that money into a SRS account, you get $1,500. I mean, that's pretty good, right? So, how do you sign up for SRS? Very simple. Okay, there are three designated local banks operators of the SRS. Of course, DBS is one of them, and OCBC and UOB. Okay, and the process is relatively straightforward. You can just fill out an application form, typically, you know, and what they will need from you is normally a NRC, okay, but some banks may require a bit more information, okay, but it's actually a very simple process. Okay, so you've gone through the effort to open up a SRS account, okay? What do you think that most of our friends and fellow Singaporeans actually then do with the, you know, the money that you put in SRS? Okay, there are three asset classes here. Which do you think is the asset class that most people will put as their main source of investment in the SRS? How many say shares? How many says insurance? And how many says cash? Okay? The fact is that after taking all the effort of going through, you know, opening the SRS account, most people actually just put it in cash. Okay? And the next most popular is insurance product and shares. Okay? That brings me to the next quiz. What is the interest rate that SRS accounts pays for cash? So how many says, you know, CPF actually pays 2.5%. Huh? So how many says A? Wow, okay, majority. How many says B? Nobody. Are you sure it's not C? Okay, you're right. The answer is 0.05%. So most of the time, this money is actually sitting in your SRS account, actually doing nothing. Anybody knows what is the the inflation rate for February this year? It was 4.9%. So actually, you are better off spending the money now. Because the money you put in the SRS cash account, value is eroding every day. Okay, even on average, okay, Singapore inflation rate is still at about 3%. So you really need to make your money work for you. Otherwise, you may end up like this. So two elderly couple, you know, seeing their financial advisors, and the fact is that they thought, you know, they have accumulated enough in their investment. But in actual fact, what happened is that they need to defer their retirement for another 50 years. So, what are the type of things that you can do with the SRS account? Okay, there's actually very little restrictions in terms of the products or asset classes that you can go into. Okay, so the typical products include unit trust, shares, fixed deposit, property fund, single premium products, which is an insurance product, typically, and bonds. Okay, but the differences to CPF is that you can't use it for direct property investment. Okay? And there are also other types of life insurance that you can't invest in. For example, critical illness or health or long-term care type of plan. Okay, or regular savings type of plan product. Okay, just a tip for you. If you're planning to do something with your SRS, okay, wait. Typically, people actually will top up their account in between October and December. Okay, that's because of the before the close of the year, right? And that's also when most of the banks would actually offer promotions. Okay, so it's like a Great Singapore Sale. So wait for it. Okay. Now the fact is that, as I have shared with you earlier, one of the things that with SRS is that you have to see it as a long-term investment. You can't really take it out without incurring potentially substantial penalties. So what should you then invest in? Okay, let's look at the performance of some of the typical asset classes that we look at. Okay, this is the cumulative returns, okay, of two asset classes: Asia equities ex-Japan and bonds. Okay, and what you see here is we basically added up the returns of the Asian equities ex-Japan as well as bonds for the period between 2004 and 2008, so over a 5-year period. That's the investment horizon. And you can see that basically the equities returns can fluctuate quite a bit. You have periods whereby you get a cumulative return of close to 80%, and there are times, especially for those who have invested in the last 5 years in Asia Pacific equities, you haven't really been making any sort of returns. Okay, so, but on the other hand, you can see that bonds, typically, the returns is quite constant. Okay, and I think Sam shared earlier on. That's why it is people who are probably nearer to the retirement age and so forth, where you have a shorter investment horizon, it's better off to look at bonds, okay, because of the stability and the consistency in terms of the returns. Okay, but if you look over a longer investment horizon, so same thing, but you look through a 10-year period, okay, you can see that the performance of equities tends to actually perform better, okay? And here, time is actually your friend, and it can help, in terms of equities, it can help you ride out the different market cycles. So, again, looking at the cumulative performance, for bonds, typically it ranges between about 6 to 8%. For equities, it ranges actually between 15 to 20% a year. Okay, so for those of you who have, who are younger and you have a longer investment horizon, you should actually look into putting it into equities. Okay, but having said that, picking the right asset classes is really challenging. Okay, this is sort of the returns ranked according to the best performing to the worst performing of various asset classes over the different years. Okay, I think Sam mentioned about gold. I mean, gold has been a stellar performance for the last 2 years. Okay, but of course this year it started off on 2012 and 2013. Gold prices have come down quite substantially. Okay, so it's always a challenge for people to pick the right asset classes. Okay, if it's so easy, then I guess we all won't be working already, right? But hopefully, it doesn't have to be like buying a lottery ticket, okay? So, how should you invest in planning for your retirement? As Sam shared, you should put aside a portfolio, okay, to generate the sort of investment returns that you're looking for. Okay, and at DBS, we actually work with Morningstar, which is a very well-known investment consultant, to come up with certain strategic models. Okay, you don't have to take this down. The good news is that I don't have a stop tip, but what I can tell you is the portfolios here is available in the DBS website, and more importantly, it's free of charge. Okay, you can download the information. Okay, but as what Sam was sharing earlier on as well, you know, for people who are nearing their retirement age and need a more consistent returns or income stream, okay, it is probably advisable that you consider something more defensive. So in this case, typically you would put about 95% in bonds or cash, okay, and about 5% in equities. This sort of portfolio over the long term will generally return you about 2 to 3%, okay, but at very low risk. For people who are more, I guess, in the middle, you know, you might want to consider putting aside something into a balanced model, where there's typically, you know, 50% into bonds and cash and 50% into equities. Again, this sort of portfolio would typically return about 7 to 9% of returns per year, but of course, the risk correspondingly goes up, okay? And for people who are, I guess, younger and have a longer investment horizon to look at, and typically, you know, have a bit more risk appetite, you can look at a growth model, which would put typically about 70%, as what Sam also mentioned, into equities and 30% into bonds. So, what is important to note, I guess, in terms of the key learnings that I hope you can take away from today's presentation is, one, do take charge of your retirement and plan early, okay? Second thing is, do consider SRS. Again, it's a form of a disciplined savings for retirement, and it can really help to complement your other investment plans, such as CPF. And of course, as I mentioned earlier on, again, one of the key things is the tax benefit. Just by putting aside this money, you know, into SRS account, and you can still generate, you can still invest the money and so forth, as opposed to just straight out taking the money and invest, you actually get tax benefit, okay? And lastly, it's not enough just to put the money into SRS. You need to make the money work for you, okay? So hopefully you can, the information on the model portfolio is something for you to consider. With that, I thank you. Thank you.